And now we will hear briefly from Chantal Carpentier about the road to Rio+20. Chantal?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure for me to be here. Hopefully, I'm not going to say too much that you already know. If we can go to the next slide. I just want to quickly, since I'm in the Secretariat for the Rio+20, talk a bit about the DESA, Division for Sustainable Development's role, who has been the organizer of what we resulted from 1992 and then organized a 10-year review and now the 20 years anniversary of the Earth Summit in 1992. Then basically talk about sector collaboration between the business and the industry that we're looking into in the preparation for Rio+20, and then the institutional framework for sustainable development or the governance. Next step. Okay, so I just quickly want to go over the objective of the conference and the thematic focus. I do this to everybody, so forgive me, but it's very important to remind each other that there's only a single objective to this conference. It's renewed commitment to sustainable development for the obvious reason that Adam just mentioned. And then the thematic focus are not green economy. We've done each other not a favor by focusing on green economy as opposed to green economy in the context of sustainable development and poverty alleviation. Alan alluded to the fact that poverty eradication is something that is the focus of the conference, was in 1992, still is, and it's not just green economy for the sake of green economy, but it's really green economy to serve sustainable development and help eradicate poverty. Next. So just quickly in terms of where we stand in terms of the negotiation, for the first time ever, the United Nations has basically opened up the process for the preparation for Rio+20. And we had by November 1st, given the deadline by November 1st for anybody on this planet really, to submit their input to the Secretariat and to the Bureau in terms of what they would like to see coming out of Rio+20. We received 686 submissions that were more than 6,500 pages of material by November 1st, and 483 of these submissions were from non-governmental actors and major groups. So that's very substantial. That's almost 77% came from civil society, universities, scientists, children and youth, etc. And then basically the task that the Bureau and the Secretariat had to do was to turn these 6,500 pages into a 20-page document to be negotiated starting in January. And after 19 days of negotiation that we had in January, March, and April, and the beginning of this month, and we're going to have another week now at the end of this month after the Memorial Day, we basically have a balloon text to 171 pages, 422 paragraphs, and only 40 days left to get to a consensus. As you know, these negotiations are always protracted and hard, but we will get there. We're hopeful. The other thing that will be an outcome of Rio+20 is also, and this is very much along the line of what Adam was saying, partnerships and other commitment. Basically, we all understand that it's getting harder and harder to get these multilateral agreement, and a lot of the material that has been done, a lot of the events that are being done are at national, regional level with different partners at the table. So there is an online dialogue now held by UNDP. You have the website there, Rio Dialogues, where basically on 9 of the topics that have been emerging as the major issues for Rio+20, there will be dialogues in between the last negotiation from the 13th to the 15th of June and the summit itself, where basically all the participants, about 2,000 of them on each of these dialogues, will go over the 12 recommendations that have been made internationally online and narrow those down to 3 recommendations that will then be brought into the conference itself. So that's one process. Of course, there's also voluntary commitments, and there's an online process as well for any business, universities, or any other citizen or groups that want to submit commitment to go online. There's also, for each citizen, a volunteer action counts website where this is done by our colleague at UNV in collaboration with them, UN Volunteer, and where we ask citizens to basically commit to action they're willing to do in support of Rio+20 and afterwards. Next. So basically, where do we stand in the process? As you can see, we've come a long way. It's been, I feel like we've been doing a marathon at the sprint pace for the last 2 years. But we're getting there. We have another week of negotiation, as I said, from the 29th of May to 2 June. It's very interesting that there was very little negotiation days at the beginning of this process. And now we're back up to 43 days of negotiation, which is exactly what we had for the World Summit on Sustainable Development in Johannesburg in 2002. We're going to have, as I said earlier, the PrepCon in Rio, and then these thematic days, these dialogue days from 16-19, and then basically we go in the Rio conference. Next. The priority areas that have been emerging are, and I think nobody's going to be surprised here, green job and social inclusion, energy for all. As you know, the Secretary General has come out with a clear goal on that, including universal access to energy, doubling the renewable energy efficiency, and 50% of the energy coming from renewables by 2030. We also went on food security and sustainable agriculture in the context of the food crisis. We had sound water management, sustainable cities, sustainable management of the oceans, improved resilience and disaster preparedness, and now increasingly sustainable forest and mountain management are emerging as well. Next. Now, in terms of example of commitment, you will see that this is one that is led by executive coordinators here, Brice Lalonde and Elizabeth Townsend, that were handpicked by the Secretary General to be kind of the link between the Secretary General and the Secretary General of the conference itself, which is Mr. Shah, the head of DESA. And basically what they have is a kind of a challenge to universities, and I noticed that ASHIS is, I've signed up on this. And basically the commitment is to teach sustainable development as part of the core curriculum, to support green campuses and through their supply chains, support research on sustainable development, and enhance the diffusion and knowledge of technologies, etc. So basically, that's one specific commitment that is out there, and there are several others that we are looking towards. If you see the partners for that commitment at the bottom of this slide. Next. This is the website for the commitment by the member states, the agencies, and the civil society, and all the major groups. So this is, again, on each of these topics that have emerged. Next. And this is the dialogue that is online, as I said earlier. So since you have those, I'm not going to go into detail. But again, all of this to say that the UN has opened up much more than it used to every people out there. We really look forward to having everybody participate in supporting Rio in their own way. Next. Now, in terms of the text itself, as I said, there's two outcomes. One is the official outcome, the negotiated outcome, as well as these commitments and partnerships. In terms of the education and research, I should have put research there as well. What is in the text that is of interest to this group? Well, there's a global observing network on ocean acidification that was in the original text, and then it goes, there's a lot of bracket text at this point, as people familiar with the process know. There's also discussion of including a 10-year framework of program on sustainable consumption and production, as well as the periodic report on the state of the planet's carrying capacity, which is an area of very important for the scientific and technical community major groups, as well as the children and youth, as well as a lot of discussion for across all topics of knowledge sharing, capacity building platform, using the IT that we have now that we didn't have it in 10 years ago, to basically help us scale up, know about what works, and then scale it up amongst all the partners, as well as access to information technology and the creation of fellowship and scholarship in discipline and interdisciplinary field related to sustainable development. Next. There's a lot of talk about the planetary boundaries, and that's related to a lot of the civil society major group feel there's not enough in the text about basically having growth within but limited by the planetary boundaries, which is this article that was published in Nature, as most of you would know. Next. What other text is related to education research? Full and equal access to education, of course, as an essential part of poverty alleviation and the achievement of the Millennium Development Goal and hopefully the Sustainable Development Goals. As well as resolve to improve educational capacity. There's a recognition that the education system we have right now does not support the transition to green economies. The labor force coming out is not prepared and skilled to meet these challenges, and therefore urging educational institutions to become models of best practices and learning in their communities as well as within the university themselves, as well as international exchange and partnership and capacity building for sustainable development. Alan kind of alluded to this, but there are now 200 million unemployed globally. That's a 12.7% rate. And 600 million new jobs are needed in the next decade to not worsen unemployment. And hopefully a lot of these would be within the green economies. And what's important also is that over 50% of the world population is less than 30 years old. And basically, a lot of the youth are disproportionately affected by the unemployment, and it's creating a lot of riots, and it's been linked to the riot and the problem that we're having right now. Next. In terms of the text and sector collaboration, what's in there is basically, again, support institutions of education to carry out research, innovation in the field of sustainable development, including how green economy can create decent and green jobs. Of course, related to what I just said, the stats that we had, it's important that these people be prepared, but also that the economy that we have, the transition, leads us to decent and green jobs. Also, workers' access to education, skills in new and emerging sector, cooperation and coordination among schools, communities, and authorities, South-South, South-North, and triangular cooperation, as well as helping us develop these sustainable development goals, as well as measure of progress that would go beyond GDP. Clearly, there's increased recognition that there's a need to not just measure GDP. Next. And this is basically a summary of the challenge that we have in Rio. This is the UN Development Index you have at the bottom there, as well as the footprint on the vertical axis. And basically, as you can see, as countries have a higher level of human index, they also have a higher footprint. And the key is, how do we increase human development index without increasing the footprint so that we can stay within the carrying capacity of the planet? And that's really the challenge that we're all facing, and that hopefully Rio is not going to solve all these problems, but hopefully will help us set a process to start heading in that direction. Next. So I want to relate to these business-related issues. We had, most of you would know, a huge business consultation in The Hague in cooperation with the Dutch government and DESA. And what I want to go over quickly before I conclude my remarks is what came out of that. But first, let me just go over the language that is related to business in the text right now. First, of course, the full engagement of public and private sectors, strengthening public-private partnership, that would not surprise anybody. Stable and previsible policy and regulatory framework, enabling environment for the private sector to innovate, an environment that will provide for investment and R&D, especially innovation and resource efficiency, as well as a very clear and loud call for leadership from business and industry on sustainable and inclusive business model practices, corporate environmental social responsibility, aligning their practices with the UN Global Compact principles, disclosure, development of resource-efficient, clean, and safe product, as well as the use of the life cycle and supply chain analysis. Next. I'm not going to go over this. All of you have seen this. There's a reason why we need resource efficiency. Next. So coming back to the Hague consultation, and what's interesting is that the three words that would summarize the outcome of the conference are innovation, collaboration, and governance. And these are pretty much the same one that Alan highlighted and that were in this paper that he distributed to participants before. They basically are the three things that they must have for a transition to inclusive and green economies. The new collaborative model will have to bring all of the stakeholders, so it's more, we're talking more of public-private people partnership as opposed to just public-private partnership that will be able to address the three dimensions of sustainable development, not just economic, social, or economic or environmental, but economic, social, and environmental. And basically we need greater clarity on how to align the incentives to support the system approach that could deliver on the three dimensions at once. We also need smart procurement. That was clear and loud at the conference, that procurement is one of the best ways, especially through gender and green procurement, to improve on the inclusiveness of our economy. A risk-sharing approach for producers, international knowledge platform that goes back to what we had under the education section, upscaling of successful model. How do we do that? We all know there's very successful model. We've all written about them. We've all read about them. What's puzzling is how come with all the IT and the communication media we have right now, we're not able to somehow upscale these models at a level that would actually have a huge impact. And of course, support of SMEs is another area that was very important, especially women-owned SMEs, which are very prominent in developing countries. Next. So I just want to end here. I'm sure there's going to be questions and then dialogue, and I'm looking forward to those and answering some of the questions that might have left.